Last week, in the prosthetist's office, I was standing on a leg that had finally stopped fitting me, the socket rubbing my skin raw, the whole thing about to give out, when I asked my mother a simple question. I asked her why the trust that was supposed to pay for my surgery, the one that was supposed to let me walk again without falling, without the bleeding, without the pain that had become a roommate I never invited, why that trust had $23 left in it. $23. She looked me dead in the eye, and she didn't even blink. She said, "It stopped being your money a long time ago, baby. That settlement became this family's money the day it hit the account. We all bled for you. You should be grateful we kept a roof over your head this long." My father stared at the carpet. My brother didn't even look up from his phone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. There's a stillness that comes over you when something you've half suspected for years finally finishes arriving, and that's the only thing I felt, a cold, clear quiet. I steadied myself on the exam table, turned around, and walked out on a leg I could barely trust. Then I drove home, I opened a folder they were certain I'd never open, I printed 5 years of statements, and I made one quiet phone call. This morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 41 missed calls from my mother. And one voicemail, 30 seconds long, in a voice I'd never heard come out of that woman in my entire life, shaking, begging. "Maya, please. Please call me back. We're going to lose everything." Before I tell you exactly how their whole world came down, and it came down fast, do me a favor. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're sitting when the truth finally shows up and does its work. Tell me you're here. Now let me take you back 8 years. To a crosswalk, and a city bus, and the brakes that nobody had bothered to fix. I was 16 the day the world came apart, and the strange thing is how little I remember of the actual moment. The brain protects you from some things by simply refusing to keep them. I remember the crosswalk light turning to the little white walking man. I remember stepping off the curb with my earbuds in. And then there's a gap, a clean white gap where the worst seconds of my life should be, and after the gap, I remember the pavement against my cheek and the sound of somebody screaming who, it turned out later, was me. It was a city transit bus. People who saw it said it never slowed down. The investigation said more than the witnesses did, that the brakes on that bus had been flagged twice by drivers and the maintenance contractor had signed off on them anyway, because pulling the bus for repairs cost money and money was the thing that company protected above all else. They protected their money. Nobody, that morning, protected my leg. My right leg was crushed below the knee. The surgeons tried for 9 days to save it. I was 16, they wanted so badly to save it, and in the end they couldn't, and they took it below the knee, and I woke up in a recovery room into a body that was going to be a negotiation for the rest of my life. I spent the better part of a year learning everything over again. How to balance. How to stand on a leg that ended where it shouldn't. How to walk on a prosthetic without watching my own feet like they belonged to a stranger. There's a kind of pain after an amputation that doesn't have a polite name, phantom pain, they call it, your nerves still insisting on a foot that isn't there, lighting up at 2 in the morning like a phone ringing in an empty house. The physical therapy room had a smell I will never forget as long as I live, rubber mats and rubbing alcohol and somebody else's hard effort. I learned to fall correctly so I wouldn't break a wrist on the way down. I learned that the word progress can mean making it from the parallel bars to the door without crying, and that some days even that was too much to ask of a 16-year-old. There was a hospital bracelet they cut off my wrist the day they finally sent me home, and my mother kept it in a kitchen drawer, and for years afterwards she would take it out at family gatherings and hold it up like a trophy. "Look how far we've come," she'd say. We. As if the leg had been hers. As if she were the one relearning the stairs. I didn't resent it back then. I was grateful. Gratitude was the only currency I had, and I spent it on everybody, generously, all the time. And there's a thing that happens to a family when a child almost dies. For a while, everybody is tender. Everybody cries in the hallway and holds your hand. And then, slowly, the tenderness curdles into a kind of accounting. I started hearing it in little comments before I understood what they added up to. How much the parking at the hospital had cost. How my mother's back hurt from all the driving. How this had been so hard on everyone. The accident happened to my body. But somewhere in that year, it quietly became a thing that had happened to all of them. And once it belonged to everybody, well, the money was going to belong to everybody too. That's how this kind of theft always starts. Not with a hand in the drawer. With a word. With the word, we. The settlement came a couple of years later, after the lawyers were done. The transit contractor's insurance company did not want a jury looking at a teenage girl with one leg and a maintenance file full of ignored warnings. So they paid. After the fees and the medical liens and all the long arithmetic of a catastrophic injury, the number that landed for my future was a little over $1.8 million. I want to be careful about what that money actually was, because every single person in my family eventually decided to get vague about it. It was not a lottery ticket. It was not luck. It was the price the world agreed to pay for something that had been taken out of my body and could never be put back. And more than that, it was meant to last. Because a prosthetic leg is not a one-time purchase. A good one wears out. A growing body changes around it. The residual limb shrinks and shifts, the socket stops fitting, and every few years you need a new one, and every so often you need another surgery to clean up what time and pressure have done. That money was supposed to be standing there, ready, on every single one of those days down the road. Including the day I'm telling you about. The attorney who handled the settlement was a man named Marcus Reyes. I remember him more clearly than I remember most of that whole stretch of my life, because he was the one person in the room who treated me like the money was mine. He sat us down at a long table with a thick file, my name printed right on the tab, and he walked us through exactly how the money would be protected. Because I'd been a minor when it happened, because even at 18 I was a kid swimming in pain medication and grief, the money would go into a trust. There would be a corporate co-trustee, a trust company, a professional, an institution whose whole job was to be a set of eyes that didn't love anybody in the room and so couldn't be sweet-talked into anything. And there would be a family trustee too, to handle the day-to-day. I want to be plain about this, Marcus Reyes said, looking right at my mother. This is not a family fund. This is Maya's medical future. Every dollar is for her health, her care, her support. Nothing else. Whoever serves as trustee answers for that. My mother nodded. A little too fast. Let me carry it for you, sweetheart, she said to me, reaching over and patting my hand. You just focus on healing. She volunteered to be the family trustee before anyone else could so much as open their mouth. She signed the papers with the good pen, the gold one she kept for Christmas cards and sympathy notes. She signed it like she was doing me a favor. I remember Marcus Reyes watching her sign, and then turning to me, not to her, and saying it one more time, slow, like he wanted it on the record in front of everyone. This money is only ever for Maya. Whoever holds it answers for that. My mother said, of course, in the warm, smooth voice she used for company. He held her eyes a beat longer than was comfortable. I didn't understand, back then, that he was a man who had seen this exact thing go wrong before, and was trying, with the only tools a lawyer has, words on a page, to keep it from going wrong again. I never read one page of that file. It went home with her. I went home to learn how to climb the stairs. Here's the thing you have to understand about my family, because without it none of the rest makes sense. In our house, gratitude wasn't a feeling. It was rent. It was the price you paid for being allowed to take up space, and the one unforgivable sin, the only one, was ingratitude. So for years, the money was just a thing my mother managed, the way she managed the thermostat and the holiday schedule and which relatives we were and weren't speaking to that season. I'd ask about it sometimes. Not often. Asking felt ungrateful, and I'd been trained too well. How's the account doing? I'd say, careful, the way you ask about something you've been taught not to want. You don't worry about that, she'd say. That's what I'm here for. And the one time I really pushed, I was maybe 20, just steady enough on my feet to start imagining a life of my own. She put down whatever she was holding and gave me that patient, sorrowful look she used right before she rewrote something. You weren't in any condition back then, honey. You were a child, you were on all that medication. We made the decisions as a family. You don't remember it the way it was. And the awful thing is, she was a little bit right. I didn't remember a lot of things clearly from those years. The pain and the medication and the depression had blurred a whole long stretch of my life into fog. And that fog was a door she could walk through any time she wanted. If I couldn't fully trust my own memory of those years, then her memory was the only one in the room. Whatever she said had happened, had happened. That is a dangerous thing to hand another person. I handed it to her every day for years and never once noticed I was doing it. The irony, and I didn't see it until much later, is what I do for a living. I keep the books for a small family-owned hardware and garden store on the edge of town. I reconcile accounts. I follow money. All day long I look at other people's numbers and I find the dollar that's in the wrong place, because a ledger always balances, and if it doesn't, it means somebody moved something they're hoping you won't notice. I was trained to audit strangers all day long. And I was trained, by that same family, to never, ever audit my own. There was a folder, by the way. A red expandable folder, fat with paper, that lived in the back of the hall closet behind the boxes of Christmas decorations. I saw it 100 times. I never opened it. Because it was hers. In that house, everything was hers. The summer I turned 21, the condo appeared. It was in Florida, on the Gulf, a bright 2-bedroom place a block off the beach with a balcony and a pool the whole building shared. My mother talked about it the way you'd talk about weather, like it had simply arrived. We all needed something good, she said, after everything this family went through. A place to get away and heal. She had a new little key cut for it and put it on her ring, and that key would catch the light every time she set her keys down on the kitchen counter. I was never invited to the condo. Not once. Not for a holiday, not for a weekend, not for a single afternoon. The place that got bought so the family could heal from my accident apparently did not require the presence of the person the accident had happened to. I noticed it the way you notice a draft in an old house. Not enough to do anything about. Just enough to feel cold in one spot. I remember one Sunday they all came back from a week down there, tanned and loose and laughing about a seafood place on the pier, passing a phone around the dinner table to show each other photos. My mother caught me looking and said, brightly, "Oh, you'd hate the drive, honey, 12 hours in the car with your leg." And everyone nodded, like that settled it, like the only reason I'd never set foot in a place my own money had paid for was the kindness of sparing me a long car ride. I helped clear the plates. I went back to my room off the garage. That was the whole conversation. That was how it always went, never a door slammed in my face, just a door that somehow was never, ever open. There was a joint account too, by then. My mother had opened it, for Maya's expenses, with both our names on it. The idea was that the trust would feed money into it, and I'd spend it on what I needed. In practice I almost never touched the debit card, because every time I bought anything bigger than groceries, she'd ask about it, and the asking wore me down. So I just stopped. The statements went to the house, because the house was where I lived, in the converted room off the garage with its own door to the driveway. The mail came to her. The house was hers. When I was 22, I tried to use that card to put a deposit on a little apartment of my own. The charge went through. Before I'd even finished filling out the rental application, my phone rang. $1,200, Maya. For what? She wasn't even angry. That was the worst part. She was concerned, the way you're concerned about a child holding something sharp. I told her about the apartment. There was a pause, and then a soft, sad little laugh. "Oh, honey. You're not ready to live alone. Not after everything. Let me hold on to the card for a while." I gave her the card. I told myself it was easier. And it was. It's always easier to stop pushing a door that pushes back at you. I didn't look at the statements. I assumed somebody was watching them. Somebody was. There was one person who tried to tell me. My Aunt Lainey, my mother's younger sister, the one relative in our whole family who would say a true thing at exactly the wrong moment, usually after a glass of wine too many. On my 22nd birthday, she handed me a card. And inside, under the little printed verse, she'd written something in her small, careful handwriting. Ask Marcus about the accounting, sweetheart. Just once. Promise me. I read it twice. Marcus. Marcus Reyes, the lawyer? Ask him about what accounting? It felt like a riddle from someone who'd had too much Chardonnay. So I folded the card and I slid it behind a photo on my dresser and I told myself I'd ask Lainey what she meant. I forgot for 2 years. That's what being managed does to you. You stop reaching for things you aren't handed. You forget you were ever supposed to reach at all. The card sat behind that photo, patient, true, ignored, for 2 whole years, while every month, like a heartbeat, money I had a right to drained out of an account I'd been taught not to look at. If you're watching this and there's a card, a comment, a warning somebody once gave you that you brushed off because you weren't ready to hear it, type, "I should have listened," down below. Because I've learned the people who love you sometimes hand you the truth folded up small, at the wrong time, in the wrong words. And it's still the truth. The morning everything finally cracked open started, the way a lot of disasters do, in a doctor's office. My prosthetic had been failing for a while. The socket no longer fit the way it should, my residual limb had changed shape over the years, the way they do, and the old socket had started rubbing the skin down to a raw, weeping sore that wouldn't heal. I'd been ignoring it, the way you ignore a noise your car makes, turning the radio up, hoping it goes away. But it had stopped being a noise and started being a presence. I'd fallen twice in a month. The phantom pain was screaming at night. So I went to see a surgeon, Dr. Aronson, and my prosthetist together. My mother insisted on coming, to hear it for myself, she said, and she brought my father and my brother Cody, because somehow these appointments had become family events, the way a verdict is a family event. We filled the little exam room. I sat up on the table. They lined up in the chairs along the wall. Dr. Aronson put it to me straight, which I appreciated. The old hardware and the old socket weren't going to carry me anymore. He recommended a revision surgery to clean up the bone and the scar tissue that had built up, and then a modern prosthetic, a microprocessor knee and foot, the kind that reads the ground and adjusts 1,000 times a second, the kind that would let me walk on stairs and uneven ground without falling, without that bone-deep pain. Done right, he said, you stop falling. You stop bracing for the next fall. You get your life back. I hadn't let myself want that out loud in years. He mentioned the cost the way surgeons do, the number that comes attached to getting your life back. With the surgery, the device, the hospital, the rehab, and the weeks I'd miss at work, all in, somewhere around $165,000. And sitting there on that crinkly paper, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Relief. Because there was a trust. There had always been a trust. This exact moment, a surgeon and a date and a number, was the entire reason that money existed. For once in my life, the worst news of the day came with the answer already attached. I didn't have to be afraid. While the scheduler was talking, I opened the banking app on my phone to start moving things into place. It had been so long since I'd logged in that it made me reset my password. Then the balance loaded. $23. I looked at it the way you look at a word that suddenly stopped making sense. I refreshed it. $23.11. I checked I was in the right account, my name, the right last 4 digits. $23 and no cents at all. Mom, I said, quiet, because I genuinely thought it was a glitch. The account only has $23 in it. That's a mistake, right? She didn't flinch. That's the part one keep coming back to. There was no scramble in her face. No flicker of being caught. She'd clearly known that number for a long time. She just never expected me to look. She shrugged. It stopped being your money a long time ago, baby, she said, and her voice was almost gentle. That settlement became this family's money the day it hit the account. We all bled for you. You should be grateful we kept a roof over your head this long. The room got very quiet. My father studied the floor like there was an answer written in the tile. My brother Cody kept scrolling, thumb moving, eyes down. Not one of them looked surprised. They looked like people who'd agreed on a story a long time ago and were waiting to see if I'd sign it too. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. There was a strange stillness that came over me, almost peaceful, the kind that arrives when something you've half known for years finally finishes showing up. I reached for the new prosthetic catalog the office had handed me. I set it down. I stood up, steadied myself on the table, and I said one word. Okay. That was all. Just, okay. I turned and walked out of that exam room on a leg I could barely trust, and not one of them followed me. I drove home before they did. I let myself into my room off the garage and I stood in the middle of it and just breathed for a minute. And then I remembered the red folder. In the back of the hall closet. Behind the Christmas boxes. In the part of the house that was hers. I'd seen it 100 times and never once opened it, because it was hers, because everything was hers. I went and got it. I carried it back to my room. I sat down at my little desk, and for the first time in my life, I opened it. The first page was the trust agreement. And right there at the top, before any of the legal language, was a line that made me sit up straight in my chair. Beneficiary, Maya Renee Dunmore. Sole beneficiary. Not the family. Not my mother. Me. Only me. I read it 3 times. And then something in me, the thing that does this for a living, woke all the way up. Because I'm a bookkeeper. I spend my whole working life proving that money came from somewhere and went somewhere, and that the two sides match. And here was a folder full of money that, by the looks of it, didn't match at all. I kept turning pages. And about a third of the way in, I found something strange. 2 pages, page 11 and page 12, had been stapled together at the corner. Not paper clipped. Stapled, deliberately, so that if you were flipping through fast, the two would turn as one and you'd skip right over what was between them. I worked the staple out with my thumbnail and smoothed the pages flat. I'll come back to what was hiding in there, because it mattered more than almost anything. But first I needed the numbers. So I turned on my printer. I teach myself a thing at work that I'd never once applied to my own life. You don't argue with people about money. You follow it. You lay it out, line by line, until the paper says the thing for you and no one can argue back. So that's what I decided to do. I requested every statement I was entitled to as the beneficiary, which, it turns out, was all of them, and I printed 5 years of them, and I laid them across my desk, and then across my bed, and then across the floor, until my whole little room was carpeted in paper. I made coffee at 1 in the morning. I got out a red pen, the same kind I used to mark up a bad ledger at work. And I started following the money. The pattern wasn't subtle. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every single month, like a pulse, there was a transfer out of the trust. And the memo line said the same thing over and over, transfer, GDG for Glenda. The money would come from the trust into the joint account, my account, the one with both our names, and then, almost the same day, it would leave the joint account for an account that had only her name on it. The joint account wasn't where my money lived. It was a hallway. My money just walked through it on the way to her. Then I started cross-referencing the big withdrawals against the rest of my family's life. And that's when the dates began to talk. The summer the Florida condo appeared, there was a single withdrawal from the trust for $340,000. I pulled the deed for that condo. It's a public record, you can find it on the county website in about 4 minutes. And the closing date sat in the very same week as that withdrawal, the numbers close enough to hold hands. The beach condo I'd never once been invited to had my settlement in its foundation. There was $185,000 that left in chunks lined up exactly with my brother Cody, the down payment on his house, and then a second slug of money the year his sports bar went under and somebody quietly made his debts disappear. My amputation had bought my brother a house and then bailed out his failed business. There was $250,000, give or take, that flowed into the main house, a renovation, a new kitchen, a refinance that lowered their monthly payment. My settlement had remodeled the house I lived in off the garage, in the one room they hadn't bothered to update. And then there was a long, steady drip, the boat, 2 new trucks, vacations, restaurants, the ordinary expensive texture of a comfortable life, all of it leaking out of a fund that existed for one reason and one reason only, to put me back together when my body wore out. But here's the thing that, as a bookkeeper, hit me hardest. It wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. A trustee is required by law to give the beneficiary an accounting. A report. A simple, regular, here's what came in, here's what went out, here's what's left. In Ohio, where we live, I had a clear right to that. Not a favor. A right. I'd had it for years. I had never received one. Not a single page. Ever. There was a clean, perfect emptiness where 5 years of accounting should have been. You can't hide what you're required to show. Unless you're absolutely certain no one will ever ask. And she had been certain. Then I went back to those 2 staple pages, pages 11 and 12. And there was the clause they'd hidden. It said that when I reached the age of 22, on a simple letter from a doctor saying I was capable of handling my affairs, I had the right to demand a full accounting and to petition the court to remove the family trustee. I was 24. I'd turned 22 2 years earlier. They had thrown me a birthday dinner that year. They'd given me a sweater. Nobody had mentioned that I'd just become the one person on earth who could open the books. And then, near the very back of the folder, on the consent forms, the documents the corporate co-trustee, the professional set of eyes, had to sign off on for any major distribution, I found the last thing. There was a signature on every one of those consents. Teresa Vaughn, the trust officer's name, looping across the line, again and again, approving the condo, the refinance, the bailout. But Teresa Vaughn's real signature was on the original trust agreement, up front, on the signing page. I put the 2 next to each other under my desk lamp. Same name. 2 completely different hands. One careful and upright, the way she'd signed that day in the lawyer's office. The other rushed, slanted, wrong. A forgery, done by someone who had seen the name 100 times but had never once seen the actual signature. I sat back in my chair, in a room knee-deep in paper, at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I said it out loud to nobody. Found it. Let me stop here for 1 second, because I need to ask you something. If you've ever sat up in the middle of the night and finally seen, in black and white, a thing you'd been told for years you were imagining, that little awful relief of realizing you weren't crazy, you were just lied to, type, "I wasn't crazy," in the comments. Because that's the exact feeling I had at that desk, surrounded by paper, and I have a feeling a lot of you know it too. Stay with me, because what I did with that folder next is the part they never saw coming. I did not call my mother. I did not call the police. Not that night. Because a screaming midnight phone call gets you nothing. And I didn't need to break a single rule, because the whole point, the thing I finally understood at 3 in the morning, was that I didn't have to. Everything I needed was already mine to ask for. I just never asked. So I went looking for one name. Tucked into the front of that red folder, paper-clipped to the trust agreement, was an old business card. Marcus Reyes. The settlement attorney. The one man who'd treated the money like it was mine. And on the back of that card, in his own handwriting, faded but readable, were 8 words. If they ever stop accounting to you, call. He'd known. 8 years ago, before any of it happened, he'd known what kind of family he was handing that trust to, and he'd left me a door. I just never found it until now. I called his office the next morning. The receptionist told me Mr. Reyes had mostly retired, that he only kept a few matters, that she'd pass along my message but couldn't promise anything. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. An Ohio number I didn't know. Maya Dunmore, the voice said. Older now, but I knew it. I've thought about you over the years. I always hoped I'd never get this call. Tell me what's happening. The lawyer called back. I read him the whole thing in the flat, organized voice I use at work when a vendor's invoice doesn't match the purchase order. The empty trust. The monthly transfers. The condo deed. The hidden clause. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he asked me one question. Is there a corporate co-trustee? An institution? Yes, I said. A trust company. Hartwell Trust. The officer's name is Teresa Vaughn. There was a pause on his end. And when he spoke again his voice had changed, sharpened, the way a doctor's does when the scan shows the exact thing he was praying it wouldn't. Maya, I need you to hear me. You are the sole beneficiary. You are not asking anyone's permission for anything. You are owed answers, and you have been owed them for years. He took a breath. And if a corporate co-trustee's signature is on distributions she never authorized, if that name was forged, then this is not a family disagreement anymore. That becomes the trust company's problem too. Send me everything. Why would that change anything? I asked. I think I just needed to hear it, after years of being told I had no power. Because a trust company that discovers its own officer's name was forged does not circle the wagons around your mother, he said. It circles them around itself. The second they believe those consents are fake, every distribution built on them is suspect, and their own liability is on the table. They'll freeze first and ask questions later. You won't be the one applying the pressure, Maya. The facts will. I sent him everything. The statements. The deed. The 2 signatures, photographed side by side under my desk lamp. The stapled pages. And then I waited. I wasn't on the call he made, but he told me about it afterward, and I've replayed it in my head 100 times since. Marcus Reyes called Hartwell Trust and asked to speak to Teresa Vaughn directly. He told her, plainly, that he represented the sole beneficiary of a trust her institution co-administered, and that he had some documents in front of him he needed her to look at. And then he laid out the consent forms, the ones with her name signed across them, and he asked her one simple question. Did you sign these? He said there was a long silence on the line. The kind of silence, he told me, where you can hear a person's whole career going still in their chest. That is not my signature, Teresa Vaughn finally said. I never approved those distributions. I have never seen them. You have to understand what that meant for the trust company. They weren't just a witness to a theft anymore. They were exposed. A corporate co-trustee exists for exactly one reason, to stand between a family trustee and the money so this can't happen. And someone had walked right past them by forging their officer's name on years of withdrawals. Their liability was suddenly very real and very large. So they did not move slowly. Institutions never move slowly when the threat is to themselves. Within 2 business days, Hartwell placed an administrative hold on what was left of the trust and on the recoverable assets attached to it. They opened an internal review. And Marcus Reyes, on my behalf, sent a formal letter to my mother in her capacity as trustee. It demanded a full accounting. It put her on notice that the distributions were under investigation for breach of fiduciary duty and for forged co-trustee consents. It used words like surcharge and removal and personal liability. That letter is going to land on her like a cinder block, Reyes told me on the phone. And when it does, expect her to call you. A lot. Don't answer in anger. Honestly, don't answer at all if you can manage it. Let the paper do the talking. I hung up. My room was finally clear of paper now, because I'd organized every page into labeled folders, the way I organize anything I actually care about. I thought about my mother's gold pen. I thought about a key catching the light on a kitchen counter. I thought about 2 pages somebody had stapled together on purpose so I'd never read what was between them. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like the person the money belonged to. I turned off my phone for the night. I slept better than I'd slept in months. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, it did not stop. 41 missed calls, all from my mother, stacked up in a wall starting before 6 in the morning. Texts underneath them, the punctuation getting wilder the further down I scrolled. And at the very top, a voicemail, 30 seconds long. I played it once. Her voice was not the voice that had shrugged at me in the doctor's office. It was high and cracked and stripped of every bit of its certainty. Maya, please call me back. You don't understand what you've done. The trust company froze everything. There's a lawyer. They're saying things about the condo, about the house. Please, baby. We're going to lose everything. Please call me. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. My coffee was steaming beside it, that little curl of heat bending in the morning light. I watched the screen light up against the counter, again and again. 41 becoming 42, becoming more. And for once in my life, I let it ring. It wasn't cruelty. I want to be honest with you about that, because revenge was never the thing I was after. It was the first morning of my whole adult life when I was the one deciding what to pick up and what to set down. I'd spent 8 years answering, explaining, softening, managing her feelings about the things she had done to me. I was done managing her feelings. I had earned, finally, the right to let a phone ring. While I drank my coffee, I let the full picture come together, what that one quiet phone call had actually set loose. The hold wasn't only on the empty trust account. The demand letter had named the Florida condo, because the condo had been bought with trust money, and money that's stolen from a trust can be traced right into whatever it buys. The condo wasn't a family asset anymore. It was evidence. And it was recoverable. The lawyers had a clean legal name for what they could do to it. The money that had gone into the renovation and the refinance had a way of following them too, and when the lender on that house got wind that the collateral was tangled up in a fiduciary fraud, they'd start asking their own nervous questions. That was the everything my mother was so afraid of losing. Not my settlement. She'd already lost that the day she spent it. What she was about to lose was the entire life she had built on top of it. A different number called. Cody. I answered my brother, because for all his scrolling and all his silence, I wanted to hear it. Beck, Maya, you have to call her back, he said, and his voice was shaking. She's coming apart. They're saying she could be personally on the hook for all of it. Did you know? I asked him. Cody. Did you know it was my money? A long breath on the line. I told her to stop, he finally said. 2 years ago. When I figured out where the down payment on my house came from, I told her it wasn't right. She said you'd never look. She said you didn't have the head for money anymore, after the accident. I'm sorry. I should have told you. 2 years. He'd known for 2 years. He'd taken the bailout for the bar anyway. Knowing and stopping are not the same thing. My father left a voicemail somewhere in the middle of all of it. 14 seconds. Your mother handled the money, Maya. I never looked at any of it. I'm sorry. And then the sound of him breathing, and a click. I never looked. As if not looking were the same thing as innocent. As if you could live in a remodeled house and vacation in a beachfront condo for years and never once let yourself wonder where it all came from. The calls kept widening out, like rings in a pond. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in a year texted to tell me I was tearing this family apart. An hour later that same cousin texted again, just a question mark, because the story had started to turn, and she wasn't sure anymore which side was safe to stand on. Aunt Lainey called. I answered her. She didn't ask me to call my mother. She just said, very quietly, I should have made you read that card, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. I just wrote it and hid it behind a photo and hoped. I told her the card had done exactly what it needed to do. 2 years late. She cried a little. I didn't. I'd done my crying 8 years ago, in a hospital bed, over a different kind of loss entirely. And I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it's the part that matters most. Sitting at that counter, letting the phone ring itself out, I kept waiting to feel powerful. Triumphant. The way you imagine you'll feel when the people who hurt you finally panic. And it never came. What came instead was something smaller and stranger and a whole lot better. It was the feeling of putting down a bag I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was heavy. For 8 years I had been the family's accountant of guilt, the one who kept everyone else's feelings balanced, who made sure nobody ever felt bad about what they'd done to me. And that morning I simply closed the ledger. Not in anger. I just stopped doing a job nobody had ever paid me for. The trust company wanted a meeting fast, because the longer a forged signature situation sits open, the worse it is for the institution. Their offices were on a high floor of a downtown building in Columbus, about 2 hours from home, all glass and gray carpet and the particular hush of places where money is discussed in low voices. I drove myself. I brought my cane, my old prosthetic still wasn't trustworthy, and I brought my folders. Marcus Reyes met me in the lobby and rode up in the elevator beside me without saying much, which I appreciated. The conference room had a long glass table. There were more people than I expected. Teresa Vaughn and 2 other Hartwell officers on one side. Reyes and me at one end. And then my family came in, because my mother had insisted on bringing them, the way she insisted on bringing them everywhere, as an audience. My father, moving slow. Cody, who couldn't look at me. And, to my surprise, Aunt Lainey, who caught my eye across the room and gave me the smallest nod. My mother sat down across from me and arranged her face into something wounded and dignified. She'd worn the cardigan she wears to funerals. I just want to say, she started, before anyone had even opened a folder, that this is humiliating. Dragging a family matter into a place like this, like we're criminals. I managed that money for years. I managed it for Maya. For all of us. I did what any good parent would do. There it was. The lie, said first, said calm, said for the room. I didn't argue with it. I just slid the statements across the glass. These are 5 years of trust statements, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Show the room 1 year. 1 single year where you spent that money on me. She didn't look at the pages. You don't understand finances, Maya. You never have. You were a sick child. You weren't capable of understanding the decisions that had to be made. The same door. The one she'd walked through for 8 years, my injury made her the only reliable witness in my own life. But this time the room was full of people who weren't relying on her memory. They were reading. Marcus Reyes opened his folder, and his voice was unhurried, almost bored, which somehow made it worse for her. He laid down the condo deed. He laid the matching withdrawal beside it, $340,000, the same week. He laid down Cody's down payment, the bar bailout, the renovation, the long string of monthly transfers marked GD. He laid the trust agreement open to the page that defined the standard. The standard in this trust, he said, is the health, education, and support of the beneficiary. The beneficiary is Maya. Not the family. A beach condo is not Maya's health. Bailing out her brother's restaurant is not Maya's support. He let it sit. And a trustee is required to render an accounting to the beneficiary. We have requested every accounting from the past 5 years. He paused. There are none. Not one was ever produced. The room was very quiet. My father was staring at the table. Cody had gone gray. My mother reached for the word that had carried her for 8 years. This is a family, she said, scanning the table for an ally. Families share. And you are all sitting here letting a bank turn my own daughter against me over some paperwork. And that's when Teresa Vaughn opened her own folder. She's a small, precise woman, and she'd been silent the whole time. But when she spoke, the whole room turned toward her like a compass finding north. She laid 2 sheets side by side and turned them so everyone could see. 2 signatures. Her name on both. This is my signature, on the original trust agreement, she said, touching the careful, upright one. And this, she touched the rushed, slanting one, is the signature on every major distribution consent for the last 4 years. The condo. The refinance. All of it. She looked up, and her voice didn't rise at all, which made it land like a dropped stone. That is not my signature. I never saw these distributions. I never approved of them. Someone signed my name. Silence. Real silence. The kind with weight to it. One of the other Hartwell officers leaned toward Reyes and said, "Low, but it carried. The forged consents are a separate matter. We'll be referring those internally." He did not look at my mother when he said it. He didn't have to. A forged signature is not a family disagreement. It has its own set of doors, and they don't open back into the family. And then Reyes added the last piece, quietly, almost as an afterthought. There's also the matter of the beneficiary's rights at 22. This trust gave Maya, at that age, the right to demand an accounting and to petition to remove the family trustee. She turned 22 2 years ago. He looked at my mother. She was never told. The clause appears to have been deliberately concealed, 2 pages stapled together so they'd turn as one. That broke the silence, but not the way she wanted. My mother stood up so fast her chair tipped back and clattered against the glass wall. The wounded dignity was gone, and what was under it had teeth. "Everything I did for this family," she shouted, and her voice cracked across that glass room. And everyone, the officers, my father, Cody, even Aunt Laney, leaned back from her just slightly, the way you lean away from a flame. I kept us alive. I kept a roof over all of us. She would have nothing without me. Nothing. Nobody said a word. She stood there breathing hard in her funeral cardigan, in a room full of paper that said the exact opposite of every word out of her mouth. And I understood something, watching her, the more she insisted, the more she lost. She was handing them her own rope. There was nothing I needed to add. And from the far end of the table, Aunt Laney, who hadn't said one thing all morning, laid her hands flat on the glass. "Glenda," she said quietly. "I begged you to tell her. 3 years ago, you sat in my kitchen and you told me she'd never look." She turned to me. "Steady. You told all of us she'd never look." The room understood that sentence completely. It is not a misunderstanding if you planned around her never finding out. It didn't all happen in one day. These things never do. But it happened. The court removed my mother as trustee. Hartwell, Teresa Vaughn's company, was appointed to take over. Professional eyes at last. The eyes that should have been there the whole time. A surcharge order followed, which is a clean legal way of saying she was personally responsible for every dollar she had taken. Not the trust. Not the family. Her. The money she had spent as if it were hers had become a debt that was very much hers. The trouble for her was where the dollars had gone, into the condo and the house, and you cannot write a check from a beach condo. So the lawyers did what the law allows. They put a lien on the Florida condo, because it had been bought with stolen funds and could be traced cleanly to them. A notice went on to the title. The lender on the main house, already nervous, tightened its grip. The condo I'd never once been invited to would be sold, and the proceeds would come back to the trust, back to me, back to the surgery it was always meant to pay for. My mother had built her whole life on top of my accident, floor by floor. And the foundation had finally been examined. The reputation went last, the way it always does. Slow, and then all at once. We live in the kind of town where image is a currency people spend carefully, and my mother had spent hers on a single story, the devoted mother who gave up everything for her broken daughter. That story had been worth a great deal at church and at the garden club. Now the other story was moving quietly through town, the way the true ones do. She'd chaired a charity drive every spring. The invitation to chair it didn't come this year. A neighbor stopped me at the mailbox, lowered her voice, and said, "We had no idea, Maya. None of us did." I believed her. That was the whole point of how my mother had built it. Nobody was ever supposed to know. I looked at the condo listing online, once. Bright photos, the balcony, the shared pool. Strangers would walk those rooms now, and the money would come home. I felt no triumph looking at it. Mostly I felt the strange, quiet grief of a place I'd been kept out of my whole life now being sold to pay for a wrong I never committed. Teresa Vaughn called me herself, a few weeks before the operation. The new trustee. She walked me through the distribution like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, because, to her, it was. A beneficiary needs surgery. The trust pays for the surgery. That is the entire purpose of a trust. I'm sorry it took this long to do something this simple, she said. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She was the only person in 8 years who had treated my money like it was mine without making me fight her for the privilege of it. I asked her, on that call, why the institution hadn't caught it sooner. 8 years, all that money. She was quiet for a second, and then she told me the truth, which I respected. A co-trustee reviews what comes across the desk, she said, and for years what came across the desk looked, on its face, like properly consented distributions, because someone had made sure her name was on them. We were the lock on the door, she said. And someone made a copy of the key. That was the whole game my mother had played. Not breaking in. Just making sure the alarm never had a reason to go off, by signing, in someone else's hand, that everything was fine. The surgery happened at the end of the spring, paid for exactly the way it was always supposed to be paid for, out of the trust, approved by a trustee who answered to me instead of around me. In pre-op, a nurse fastened a paper bracelet on my wrist, the way they had 8 years before. But this time, when she asked me to confirm my information, I read my own name off the band myself. Maya Renee Dunmore, I said, out loud. Such a small thing. It undid something very large. Is anyone here with you? The nurse asked, clipboard in hand. Family in the waiting room? My aunt, I said. Lainey. Just Lainey. One person. But the right one. The only one in 8 years who had ever tried to hand me the truth, even folded up inside a birthday card, even 2 years too early. She was out in the waiting room with a paperback she wasn't really reading. When they wheeled me back, she squeezed my hand and said, "You finally called Marcus, didn't you?" And I laughed, which is not the easiest thing to do on a gurney. My mother tried to see me once more, after, when I was home and healing. She came to the door, and it was my own door by then, my own apartment, a lease in only my name, a deadbolt that locked from the inside. She stood on the step with her hands folded and something gentle rehearsed onto her face. "I think we should start over," she said. "Family forgives. We can put all of this behind us. I'm still your mother." I held the door. And I want to tell you, I wasn't angry. That surprised me, standing there. I'd expected to be angry forever. Instead, I just felt clear. The way the air gets clean after a storm finally moves through. "You can call yourself a good mother," I said. "You've been doing it for years. I'm not going to argue with you about it." I paused. "I'm just not going to call you back." She started in on everything she'd sacrificed. I closed the door, gently, and I turned off the porch light, and I listened to her car back out of a driveway that was no longer mine to share. I want to be careful here, because I know how these stories are supposed to end: bad people punished, good person triumphant, a tidy little bow on top. The truth is quieter than that, and harder. Getting the money back did not give me back the 8 years. It didn't hand me back the version of myself who trusted easily, who answered every call, who believed that being managed was the same thing as being loved. I got the surgery. I walk on a leg now that reads the ground and catches me before I fall. Some mornings I forget the cane by the door entirely. But there is no court order that refunds the years you spent believing you didn't have the right to ask for what was already yours. That part I'm still healing. That part doesn't come with a lien you can file. Winning didn't end the pain. It just ended the lie. There's a difference, and I had to learn it the slow way. My brother texted me a few weeks after the meeting. "I didn't know it was your surgery money." I swear I didn't know it was for the surgery. I looked at that for a long time. He'd known it was my money for 2 years. He just hadn't known, until that glass room, that it was the exact money standing between me and walking without pain, as if there were a version of stealing your sister's settlement that only became theft at the very end, when the cost got specific enough to picture. He offered, later, to pay his part back in installments, in a message thick with the word "sorry." I answered that one with a single line: send it to the trust. Not to me. The trust has a real accountant now. Everything that comes back gets counted, line by line, in front of people my mother can't edit. I didn't want his guilt. I wanted the record corrected. She was right about one thing, my mother. Just the one. She told me it was never really my money. And in the end, she was correct, though not the way she meant it. It was never really money at all. Money is what they saw when they looked at that account. To me it was the leg. The walking. The nights without the phantom phone ringing in the empty house. It was the proof the world had offered that what happened to me at a crosswalk, at 16, mattered. It was my own life, turned into a number so that the number could survive long enough to come back and save me. They saw a fund. I see a girl on the pavement, and everything she was owed. I put that red folder away in a drawer last week. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it out. I'm not interested in pretending it never happened. I just don't need it on the desk anymore. It did its work. I closed the drawer gently, the way you close the door on a room you've finally finished cleaning. This morning I stood in the break room before the store opened, going over the day's numbers, standing easy on a leg that holds me, the cane leaning and used against the wall. And I thought about the first rule of the work I do, the rule I'd applied to everyone in the world except the people who raised me, until the morning I finally turned it on my own life. Every dollar comes from somewhere, and every dollar goes somewhere. You follow it, line by line, until the page tells the truth out loud, and then no one can argue with it, and no one can take it from you again. I followed mine all the way home. If you've ever been told that your gratitude was the rent you paid for being taken care of, that the love came with an invoice attached, I want you to know I see you. Drop one boundary in the comments, one line you wish you'd drawn a whole lot sooner. Sometimes writing it down where another person can read it is exactly where the drawing starts. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. I tell one like this every week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.